afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It is hard to imagine that it's been 30 years. I was telling Anne and folks at my table that the last time I spoke to the Rotary Club, I was so nervous because I was 16 years old coming back from my trip to Germany, telling this group about my very profound experiences right in Germany. So I'm excited to be back 30 some years later to talk with you guys. I'm trying to figure out where am I pointing it? Okay, so I wanted to talk today a little bit about some recent independent research conducted by the Pennsylvania Economy League. Late summer, we conducted a survey of municipalities to gauge the impacts of COVID-19, or at least the initial impacts of COVID-19. But first, I want to give a little bit about the Pennsylvania Economy League. We are an independent, nonpartisan voice for good government. We're a 501c3 membership organization created, as Tom alluded to, in 1936. So we turn 85 next year. We conduct technical assistance or provide technical assistance and consulting to local government, including municipalities and school districts. We also conduct independent research, such as what I'll be presenting today, on issues impacting PA communities. We do civic education on policies impacting our state, such as a weekly email list that we'd be happy to get you signed up for. We also do regional forums. This year, of course, we've had to go to virtual, but we do hope to get back to doing regional forums, maybe in addition to virtual in the future. Additionally, we are a trusted advisor to the state legislature and to the administration on issues related to municipal government. Now about the research I'm presenting today. We conducted a survey just after Q2 revenues would have been received by municipalities. We conducted a survey of municipalities to gauge the impact of COVID-19. We collaborated with the municipal associations, including the Municipal League, the Association of Boroughs, Township Commissioners, and Township Supervisors, to conduct a short 14-question survey using SurveyMonkey as the tool. And the survey was open from August 31st through September 15th. While we wanted to get the survey out fast, we balanced that with wanting to get early but accurate portrayal of the early impact of COVID. In total, we had 430 surveys completed, 17% of the Commonwealth's 2,560 municipalities, a 17% response rate overall. An interesting fact about Pennsylvania that is not the case elsewhere is that every square inch of the state is actually incorporated. So into some kind of municipal government, whether that's the most rural, most remote part of the state that you can imagine is part of a municipality. The highest response rate we got was from cities and first-class townships, 160% respectively, followed by boroughs, and lastly by second-class townships, which are in general the less populated, more rural parts of our state. The results that I'm going to share are weighted by municipality class in order to be able to make some generalizations at a statewide level. And we had a 21% response from home rule municipalities. We also asked the respondents to identify themselves as either urban, suburban, or rural, to get a sense of the impact by community. We didn't provide them a definition, we just allowed them to self-identify themselves. 13% identified themselves as urban, 41.4% as suburban, and 45.6% identified themselves as rural. After capturing some descriptive information, we have 6 major sections of our survey. One was the challenges from COVID-19, also changes to operation personnel at the municipal level. What was the effect on revenue? What was the effect on expenses? What actions did municipalities take or plan in response to COVID? And what guidance or resources did they either pursue or do they plan to pursue as they respond? Statewide, 31.6% reported that understanding state guidance for stay-at-home orders and the reopening was extremely or very challenging. nearly half, about 46%, said it was somewhat or slightly challenging. So in total, about 77% said that it was at least slightly challenging to understand the stay-at-home orders and then the reopening phases. This is statewide. Managing public meetings, about 17% said it was extremely or very challenging. 67% said somewhat or slightly challenging. Anecdotally, I will say we really saw municipalities make great strides in improving in this category. What a difficult challenge to do public meetings while doing them virtually and having to deal with something, a new word for probably all of us, Zoom bombing. Like what, they had to figure out how to manage that while still keeping their meetings public. About 1/3 reported that managing the budget was not challenging. About 40% reported that managing staff was not challenging. And finally, noteworthy in the midst of a pandemic impacting our health, approximately half of the municipalities reported that keeping fire and EMS volunteers was at least somewhat or slightly challenging. That is sobering to think about in the middle of a health pandemic. More densely populated areas, urban and suburban municipalities, ranked all of the issues as more challenging than did their rural counterparts. That's perhaps not surprising when you think of the array of services that denser populations provide, and also when you think of frankly, the impact of that first phase of COVID really impacted our more densely populated areas the most. We also dug a little bit deeper on how municipalities handled changes to public meetings. Cities and first-class townships were the most likely to report moving meetings to virtual using video conferencing and teleconferencing. Second-class townships were more likely to respond that they implemented social distancing measures or reduced capacity for public meetings. Some other approaches included accepting comments and questions in advance, get around that whole Zoom bombing thing, recording and posting meetings online, holding live stream events, and then a few even reported having outdoor meetings. We also asked what kind of changes municipalities made related to personnel. Not unlike the private sector, municipalities were able to shift much of their workforce to telework where possible. Nearly half reported using work from home or telework arrangements. Other options to protect the health and safety of staff that couldn't work from home included revised schedules, to reduce the number of employees working together, reduced hours, or other options such as instead of having 2 people in one truck driving to a work site, for example, they would have each individual drive their own vehicle. Notably, first-class townships and cities, again, these more densely populated versus rural, reported changes related to personnel. Okay, jumping into the effects of revenue. So early on, what was the impact of COVID on revenue? More than 1/3 actually reported that it was still too early to tell, but about 20% indicated that there was really no change or even an increase in revenue. However, about half, or 45%, just under half, reported a decrease in revenue. Of those, most reported 10% or less of a decrease in revenue. To be honest, PEL and others who work with municipal government, we were a bit surprised by that relatively low result. To be honest, we were anticipating a larger impact on things like the EIT as we watched unemployment rate jump. However, the impact on EIT appears to have been relatively muted thus far. We also asked what were the specific areas of revenue loss. EIT was among the areas of revenue loss, even though muted. Anticipated liquid fuels allocation was next. This is really looking toward 2021 and projected revenue loss. Other items that were indicated as revenue hits were special or general purpose taxes and fees, such as parking fees, park rentals, other fee-based revenue that was, of course, impacted during the stay-at-home phase of the pandemic. About 1/4 reported some real estate loss, and about 30% reported anticipated loss of state funds, either pension aids, grants, or shared revenue. And then we asked them what was the impact on their expenses. Mixed bag, to be honest. So we saw about 20% reported a decrease in expenses, 40% really reported no change at all, and the remainder reported some increase in expenses, most less than 10%. The effects on expenses, digging deeper into those, COVID-related equipment and cleaning were the two most reported source of the increased cost. Technology such as video conferencing services, alterations to workspace to put up plexiglass for protection of staff and public, those were also reported fairly highly at about 40% reported having to implement things like that, which increase their costs. Finally, personnel-related costs are on the far right-hand side of the graph here. From overtime to disability benefits, these were the least reported source of additional expense, at least early on in the pandemic. We were also very curious about the actions taken or being considered in the near term. Over half of all municipalities instituted a spending freeze, something PEL recommended fairly early on, to cut or reduce non-essential expenses. Again, more cities and first-class townships reported taking these kinds of actions. Some municipalities reported other actions such as delaying pension obligation payments, utilizing tax anticipation notes or TANs, obtaining a line of credit. These were reported, each less than 5% of the respondents reported that. However, that does have some long-term implications for those communities that are pursuing that kind of solution. We also wanted to understand what are municipalities thinking of toward the future. Literally as we speak, municipalities are working on their 2021 budgets, and up in Harrisburg, they're working on the 2021 budget to finish that off for the year. And the majority of municipalities did report seeking out grants or funding opportunities. More than a third that they will reported that they will eliminate or delay capital projects. And a small percentage, but a relatively large number when it comes to state support, indicated that their interest in DCED, the Department of Community and Economic Development, programs such as the Strategic Management Planning Program. That's a program that's designed to help municipalities produce 5-year financial plans and review operations, while a small percent, a total of 38 of the total respondents that we had, expressed an interest in that. Similarly, a small percent, but a relatively large number when it comes to support, indicated interest in the Act 47 program by DCED. And that's a program that's designed for distressed municipalities. There's specific criteria you have to meet. So I don't know if all of these communities meet the criteria, but a total of 23 expressed interest in the Act 47 program. And just as a point of reference, there are 16 in the program currently. So that's a pretty big jump if all of them were to meet the criteria and apply to that program. We wanted to understand, and this was the final question, that we wanted to understand what municipalities, who they turn to for guidance and for assistance. 75% reported that they look to counties for support and assistance, where CARES funds were dispersed. About 70% reported reaching out to their state municipal associations for guidance. And as you can imagine, the state municipal associations were very active in communicating with their communities and understanding pain points. Over half reported interest in reaching out to state government for assistance. Other noteworthy places where individuals were outreaching or communities were outreaching were councils of government, federal agencies, regional planning commissions, as well as chambers of commerce or similar organizations. Combined, about 30% were reaching out to those types of organizations. As with much of the findings, rural municipalities were less likely than urban and suburban to seek much help during the early phases of the pandemic. As I indicated, municipalities are in the middle of their 2021 budget development, and the state legislature is currently working on finalizing the budget for the year as well. We will be watching very closely the 2021 revenue and lingering impacts on local revenue. And it's perhaps not surprising that by the end of summer, the impacts on municipalities was most urgently felt by urban and suburban communities. Again, that's the dense population, that's where COVID hit. As we watch the next phase of COVID impacting our communities right now, it will be interesting to see if that shifts or changes a bit as more municipalities are impacted, unfortunately. At PEL, we will be watching 2021 revenue. Real estate taxes, for example, they were relatively unimpacted in 2020. Some of that may be timing, quite frankly. By March, most of the tax bills were out already. People were paying them. Also, a lot of people pay that through escrow, right? So they're relatively unimpacted in 2020. But 2021, especially when you consider commercial real estate and the way we have all learned to work, the changes in how we work, we are watching the real estate revenue fairly closely. And while a relatively low number reported interest in regionalism, it was interesting that a relatively high number expressed that they were reaching out to councils of government and other regional entities for assistance. So we will be watching that too for potentially some opportunities to encourage communities to consider regionalism. I will briefly wrap up. I left a little flyer, some information, and my business card on the tables. So I think you have my contact information, but you can also get the full report and more information about PEL from pelcentral.org. That's our website. I would encourage you to sign up or give me your business card and I'll sign you up for our weekly brief newsletters that we do once a week. And also, that will also get you in the loop in terms of publicizing our issues forums when we are doing those, whether they're virtual or regionally based, so that you can hopefully participate and kind of follow the work that PEL is doing. And I will wrap up just by saying that the survey results are related to the early impact of COVID. We will be watching carefully, along with all of us, right, the second wave and the ongoing impact from the economic impact that is being felt and how that will trickle down to impact municipalities. There's a lot more work to be done. I anticipate we may do follow-up surveys like this to see where we are sort of midway through the COVID pandemic and then toward the end as recovery starts to consider. We'll be watching for trends, best practices, and we'll continue our work with municipalities and with state government to help mitigate the impact of COVID. I will stop there and pause if there are any questions that I can try to help answer. And thank you again for giving me the opportunity to speak.
LeeAnne, I'll give you a question. Can you tell us a little bit more about Act 47? The City of York has talked about that over the years, and I feel like we're closer to that than ever before. Just give the members a little bit of a summary about that. You may want to repeat the question because the virtual attendees.
Sure. So Tom is asking for me to tell you a little bit more about the Act 47 program. That is a program that is funded by DCED, the Department for Community and Economic Development. It's a program for distressed municipalities. So there are very specific criteria you have to meet. I do not have them memorized, but they are looking at severe distress for municipalities. The Economy League does work with distressed municipalities, and we have a handful of communities that we're working with right now. One of the requirements that is in place, I mentioned the STAMP program earlier. That is a predecessor to the Act 47 program, and communities have to go through that STAMP process first. The goal being that that is a less intensive intervention to help communities perhaps bring themselves out of distress or at least stabilize prior to having to go into that Act 47 program. The Act 47 program is a fairly intensive program where you have consultants such as PEL or other entities that do financial consulting for municipalities that are assigned as coordinator in municipalities, and they are responsible for assisting the community. We're currently in the process of helping them reviewing their budgets, making sure that they align with the Act 47 plan for recovery. So it's a very rigorous process that communities apply for. It has some advantages in that you get some ability to modify your taxing structures a bit, which gives you some ability to bring in revenue or change your revenue mix, et cetera. And then it allows you also to just have some assistance from a coordinator in planning your exit and ideally recovery from financial distress. Any other questions?
Yeah. In a way, a follow-up to that. Is there a level of concern about potential bond defaults in Pennsylvania municipalities as a result of revenue loss due to COVID?
The question is there any level of concern around bond defaults? I am not a bond expert, so I don't have a great answer for that. I will say, and we'll continue to watch this and watch how anecdotally the municipalities we work with work, and we talk amongst ourselves, all the Act 47 coordinators and others that do this work, kind of communicate with each other. If we're starting to hear about that, we were pleasantly surprised, I think. I'd rather say the sky is falling and have it not fall, that EIT was less impacted than we anticipated. We were doing some projections over the summer and we thought it would be a much higher impact than what we're seeing in communities. Real estate, again, was fairly stable this year. So what will happen in 2021 remains to be seen, but we'll be watching that carefully. Jane?
Do you see this crisis as an opportunity or even a catalyst for maybe legislative action that could help facilitate sustainability of municipalities?
Okay, let me summarize your question. Is this a catalyst for legislative action to help communities or help municipalities? Okay, so I'm idealist, so yes, I hope so. I mean, I think there is potential for that. I think York and South Central has done some interesting things around regionalism, and I think that can be a model maybe for elsewhere in the state. And I think getting some resources to maybe support that in other parts of the state would be beneficial for our communities overall. Just more efficient use of government dollars.
LeeAnne, we have 84 of our members tuning in virtually, and a question from them: will liquid fuels revenue be less in 2021? And if so, what impact will this have on municipalities and infrastructure projects?
Yes, it will be less. So municipalities are going to have to budget around that. The numbers came out recently, earlier this fall, with what the projected 2021 impacts or revenue will be from that. And it will be less. I don't have the exact percentage or anything like that, but that is available already as communities are working through their budgeting process. They are having to schedule or plan around the reduction in those fees.
LeeAnne, does PEL have a perspective on municipal consolidation?
We do. I can. Yeah, I mean, so they're tough to do. I'll be honest. We're in the middle of working with a community right now, or two communities, on a consolidation study right now. They are complicated. There are a handful of studies that have been done over the years, and a handful of successes, and an awful lot that did not succeed when it got to the ballot. We will kind of continue to pursue those when there are communities that are looking toward consolidating. And often the first step toward consolidating, I've heard it referred to as sort of the courtship before the marriage, is to put together services, whether it's as simple as purchasing agreements, or to shared police, to starting to look at other ways to. Public works is often an opportunity where you're practically crossing boundaries anyway in some of these communities, that you can pool some of those resources, deliver services more efficiently. And that's maybe an initial step toward considering consolidation. But as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a lot of municipalities in the state, and we really like our municipalities. Having lived in other states, it's interesting that is such a feature of Pennsylvania, that there is such resistance to that. But to be honest, there is. But I think that's an area where maybe some legislative carrots can help encourage some movement in that direction.